Blink. What could happen in a blink? Nothing that important, right? Nothing that relevant, because it's instant, too short. Well, that's not what Malcolm Gladwell thinks. In his book, Blink, The Power of Thinking Without Thinking, Gladwell dives into the human mind, its unconsciousness, and shows us what our mind can do in a blink. Gladwell begins the book with an intriguing anecdote about the history of the Getty's prized Greek statue. In 1983, the J. Paul Getty Museum in California acquired a statue on loan. The art dealer who sold the statue claimed that it was an ancient Greek kouros, a very rare kind of ancient marble statue. The statue was in near perfect condition, so perfect that the Getty officials suspected that it was a fake. However, the art dealer produced legal documentation showing that the statue had been bought legitimately rather than stolen. Furthermore, art historians determined that the statue was covered in a layer of calcite, which must have taken thousands of years to form. It seemed likely that the statue was real. The Getty officially bought the statue for $10 million in the fall of 1986. But there was a problem with the Getty statue. It just didn't look right. One art historian who saw the statue for the first time decided that the statue was a fake almost immediately. Another expert looked at the statue for a couple of seconds and then told the Getty Board of Trustees not to buy it. She had an instinctive sense that something wasn't right. A few years later, it turned out that the art dealer who'd sold the statue of the Getty was a liar. The documents he gave were forged. Finally, experts discovered that it is possible to create a layer of calcite around a statue in a few years rather than many centuries. In short, it took years for experts to decide that the statue was a fake, the same information that other art historians had gotten in just a few seconds. Gladwell informs us that Blink is about what goes on in the human mind in those few seconds. Gladwell contrasts the strong rational evidence for the statue's value with art historians' instinctive hunches that the statue was wrong in some fundamental way. In the end, hunches turned out to be more insightful and perceptive than months of formal research. As Gladwell interprets it, the history of the Getty's kouros suggests that sometimes intuition can be more powerful than rationality. There are many examples in this book, but in short, Gladwell's theses run contrary to almost everything people are usually taught. While people aren't supposed to judge a book by its cover, Gladwell argues that being able to judge a book by its cover is a fundamental part of what it means to be human. However, the book also contains an important warning. There's no rule that says that snap judgments are inherently right. That's why the book will explore many examples of how snap judgments can go horribly wrong. Decisions made very quickly can be every bit as good as decisions made cautiously and deliberately. And this is where Gladwell introduces the thin slicing decisions. Enormously quick and unconscious decisions that rely on the thinnest slices of experience. Mind reading is one example of thin slicing. We use it all time unconsciously. It mostly relies on the reading of the other's face. In fact, researchers showed that our face expresses the feeling we have at the moment, even for a quick moment. At a different level for everyone, our mind can read these slight expressions on people's faces. There is enough accessible information on a face to make everyday mind reading possible. This kind of decisions or judgments cannot be explained by the individual in empirical terms, but rather in a range of abstract feelings. Like, I just had a feeling in my gut, my stomach felt wrong, and therefore extraordinarily imprecise. Although many of our decisions are taken with thin slicing instinctively, there is a natural tendency to think that the more information one has, the more he is able to make a good decision. But in fact, this is not true. Most of the time, the more superfluous information we have, the worse the decision is. Our first impression is usually the good ones, and Blink shows us many different examples supporting this. When you have too much information to take into account, it will usually have a negative impact on your decision making. The second task of Blink is answering the question, when should we trust our instincts? And when should we be wary of them? These instincts are very practical for decision making. Nevertheless, we have to understand that we should not always trust them. The book deals with the concept of Warren Harding error, which is the dark side of rapid cognition. It is at the root of a good deal of prejudice and discrimination. The implicit association test tries to assess it by measuring our second level of attitude. For example, our racial attitude on an unconscious level, the immediate, automatic associations that tumble out before we've had time to think. This test showed that we don't deliberately choose our unconscious attitudes. They are affected by what we see, what we hear, and by how society is projected to us, even if we are not in line with it. Some deficiencies are also laying behind mind reading, explaining inappropriate behavior regarding the situation. A series of wrong mind reading can lead to some dramatic ends. The author uses the example of 4 policemen who shot an innocent man following wrong judgments and instinctively guessing that he was a threat. In certain situations, people can have many misleading, thin-slicing interpretations, which can lead to inappropriate behaviors. It can be considered as temporary autism. 2 main factors can explain this kind of attitude. The first one is a highly stressful situation where the mind reduces considerably the amount of information dealt with and focuses on few ones. The second one is the lack of time to react. In these situations, we are subject to the lowest quality of intuitive reaction, where we are really vulnerable to being guided by our stereotypes and prejudices. When it comes to trusting our instincts, Gladwell argues that being aware of some bias in our thin-slicing decisions can help us to properly trust them. For example, with rich experience and passion, experts are good at using their skills to interpret and decipher what lies behind their snap judgments and first impressions. That's why experts' opinions count more than the questionable findings of a market research, because only experts are able to reliably account for their reactions. The third task is all about practice. How could we use the power of thin slicing in our favor? Can we train and educate our snap judgment and first impressions? One example Gladwell gave to convince us of that is the improvisation comedy. How are actors doing improv theater able to put on a performance as good as if the whole play had been prepared? It's because improv is an art form governed by a series of rules, and the improvisation is taking place in a frame of rules. It's the same thing in basketball. The players have training so that they can make good spontaneous decisions. How good people's decisions are under the fast-moving, high-stress conditions of rapid cognition depends on training, rules, and rehearsal. Becoming expert in something enables us to unlock our unconscious and find the way to deeply understand and interpret our first impressions, and as a result, improve our capability of snap judgment. The book suggests to slow down the situation in order to enable the mind to deal with more information. Nevertheless, this piece of advice might not be relevant in every situation. It also advises to train people to react in this kind of situations, which can help having more appropriate behaviors in some points. This book is built around a myriad of examples that follow one after the other. These different examples can be brought together to demonstrate correlations and bring out great truths. However, there are some limitations. it is possible that in practice things may work a little differently, because on the top of everything, we cannot predict people's behavior 100%. Blink is a very interesting book, and we learn a lot by reading it. First point would be about the need to balance between a decision that had been carefully thought out and formulated and an instinctive decision. What we need to learn is how to not get caught up in an extensive willingness to consider all the factors. We also need to learn that sometimes we are better off accepting that we just know something without actually knowing why we know it, and we need to respect that and harness the power of it to improve ourselves. We now understand that sometimes we'll need simplified structures of data to succeed, because when we have too many choices, we are often paralyzed and we end up making bad choices. And finally, we can notice that we can enhance our capability of snap judgment in a certain field through improving professional skills and accumulating professional experience. For us to be good managers and leaders, it is very important to be aware of this.